Okay. Oh. Welcome, everybody. It is Karelian Theological Society's Ukraine afternoon titled Ukrainian Churches During the War. First of all, some practical instructions. The event is recorded in Zoom, so remember that the name which you have given to yourself in Zoom might end up also in the recording, but we, of course, try to avoid that. And we will record only the lectures and not the discussion part. Today, we will have two lectures. Each of them is about 30 minutes. And after we have heard both of the lectures, we have then time for questions and comments. Those who are here, please just raise your hand and then we will give you the microphone so that also people in Zoom will hear your questions. And those who are in Zoom, please use the Q&A button to send your questions to our moderators. And you can find the Q&A function from the bottom of the Zoom view. So first push the button called More, and then you should be able to see the Q&A button. So just write your question there and we will pick it up and ask it here. And you can ask your questions either in English or in Finnish. If you ask your question in Finnish, we will then translate the question. Good. So my name is Heta Hurskainen and I am a chair of the Karelian Theological Society and I will be today the moderator of the discussion. But now it's time to introduce our first speaker. Please. So our first speaker is Reverend Dr. Roman Fihas. He is the director of the Ukrainian Catholic University's Institute of Ecumenical Studies in Lviv, in Ukraine. And he has received his doctoral degree from the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome, Italy, from the Faculty of Eastern Ecclesiastical Sciences. And his academic interests are ecclesiology, ecumenism, and dogmatic theology. And he's also a priest in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. So please, floor is yours. Now we will just switch the view and then you can start. You're welcome.
Thank you, Heta, for a warm presentation, and it's my pleasure to be among you and to share some of my experience in the field of ecumenism and the interreligious, interchurch dialogue in Ukraine. So, as the title of our conference, of our meeting is the situation of the churches after the war. So I just to highlight that really the day of February 24, 2022 was like a crucial line for the lives of all Ukrainians and of course for the Ukrainian churches. But to present the life after the war, I would like to highlight some main points that Ukrainians faced in their religious life before the war. So here you can see the heads of the three main churches, Metropolitan Onufri, Metropolitan Epiphany, and Metropolitan Sviatoslav. Okay. Ecumenical situation before the war. So first of all, I would like to say a few words about the religious landscape of the Ukrainian state, starting from 1991, because this is the year when Ukraine got independence. And only 2 years ahead, in 1989, we got religious freedom in our country. So you can imagine, since 50 years in Galicia and 70 years in the whole Ukraine. Religious were severely persecuted. Most of the religious community were persecuted. The only official church was a Russian Orthodox Church, and it was preserved only in few communities. For example, my church, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, counted 5 million of people, were lived in the underground, was officially cancelled by the state around 50 years since that time. So after the 70 years under severe communist regime and propaganda, a lot of religious communities died in Ukraine. So the whole generations didn't have opportunity to have a religious experience. Were physically destroyed by the communist regime. We didn't have enough priests or pastors for people to serve. But in 89 and especially in 1991, when Ukraine got independence, the people of Ukraine felt a big thirst for religious life. That's why everybody went to the church. Everybody strived to have this religious experience, which was forbidden ahead. That's why appeared a lot of new parishes. People were attending the liturgies, and the religious life was very, very fluent in this time. One important characteristic of the Ukrainian religiosity is that we didn't have one big strong church since the beginning. In Ukraine, we had diversity of the churches, and this diversity caused, I will list it in another slide, but I would like to stress that this diversity caused some tensions in the beginning of the independence. So from 1991 till 1995, there were several fights, religious fights for churches, especially in the Western Ukraine, because the churches were so little that it was not enough for every community, and because we have a lot of Orthodox, Greek Catholics, Protestants, and everybody wants to receive its former church in order to have some liturgical prayer and so on. And but after the 1995, all the religious escalation went down, and the churches understand that they have to live in one country together. That's why they started to have this ecumenical, or not ecumenical, maybe we would say inter-confessional relations. So it's compared to the situation in Russia, where the Russian Orthodox Church had the biggest church, the biggest religious community, and it will also influence the religious life of the whole country, and also influences the church-state relations inside of that country. So we can see also since 1991, all the churches started to develop their religious life, because there was no any seminary, any theological institutions, very few churches. So everything has to be rebuilt from zero almost, you know. And it was a big task for the churches to rebuild their structures, to have new pastors for the parishes which have been open, to rebuild new monasteries, and so on, so on. So even the seminary where I studied, for example, we had a seminary before the Second World War in the middle of the center of Lviv, but because it was appropriated by the state, it was never given back. So they gave us a summer pioneer camp nearby Lviv, where around 100 seminarians live for 7 years. If you want to be a priest, you have to study for 7 years, in 6-7 years. So we have to rebuild from the beginning, and only a new seminary appeared in 2006 in Lviv. In the case of Lviv. Okay, going forward to show you religious plurality in Ukraine. So we have Orthodox Christianity, we have Catholics, we have Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim community. But our religious life is very interesting because it's complicated, challenging, but very interesting because we have Orthodox, and since the beginning, Orthodoxy was divided in Ukraine. We had one church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, which which had his ties with Moscow. We had two other Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kyiv Patriarchate and Ukrainian Autocephalic Orthodox Church, which were not recognized by the world Orthodoxy. So the only one Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate was recognized, and it also creates different tensions and problems. And of course, the recognition of the two other so-called Ukrainian churches didn't happen because the clear position of Moscow. In Ukraine, we also have Catholics, but we have Catholics of Eastern Rite mostly. So that is Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and a small eparchy in Mukachevo in Transcarpathia, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church of Mukachevo eparchy. And also we have Ukrainian Roman Catholic Church as well spread in Ukraine. We have Protestant communities, but most of the Protestant communities are either Baptist or Pentecostals. We have small Lutheran communities, also we have the bishops, but still all the Protestants consider maybe 2% of all the religious landscape in Ukraine. For many ages, in Ukraine, we have Jewish communities. For example, in Lviv, before the war, we had around 100 synagogues only in my city. Of course, after the war, everything was destroyed. Right now, we have 1 or 2 synagogues in Lviv right now. But still, we have a presence of the Jewish communities in different cities of Ukraine. We have also Muslim communities. What is comparing to Europe is quite new, because for Europe, Muslim presence is something new, and for Ukrainians we have a deal with Muslim, we have a cooperation, Christian and Muslim cooperation for ages, because Crimea Tatars lived in Crimea Peninsula for ages. So this is to see the diversity of Ukrainian Christianity. The beginning of ecumenical movement, I would say we could count since 2000, and later on, when the confessions grew up and they understand we can't convert another one, so we have to cooperate with each other. The most important institution which was formed between the religious community, we call it All Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organization. So it was functioning since the late of the 90s, and right now it's functioning very good. They edited several statements, common statements, and usually it's a position of churches and other religions before the state, especially in the some important events which happening in Ukraine, for example, during the Revolution of Dignity, before the elections, in the case also during the wartime. So they have a common statements for the society. But still, division between the churches existed. It is because we just received independence and we learn how to be ecumenically open, how to cooperate between each other. But the political, historical background from one part and the political influence from inside and outside played a significant role that the churches could not come together. Also, the competition between the churches regarding the close relation with the state also played a significant role, that there were not enough trust between each other. The situation completely changed, I would like, during the Maidan or Revolution of Dignity, as we call it, because it was like for many religious leaders, it was kind of not only a sociological event which changed the whole country, but also the event of the Holy Spirit, which we can experience on Maidan when the hundreds, thousands, millions people visiting Maidan. They had a strong feeling living in some other reality of relationships between people. Why I'm saying this? Because revolution started as a sociological event, yes, and because the former president decided to go to Russia, and the society wanted to go to Europe. So it was a big clash in understanding where our country have to go, but also it was a big thirst of anti-corruption, of thirst for changes in our countries. And very important that the churches felt this important calls from the society. And what was important that almost all the churches were presented in Maidan, in the Revolution of Dignity. For example, you can see the Molotowny Namet, the prayerful tent for prayer. It was used by different denominations. So we had different prayers over there. We have liturgies over there. Protestants have their own tent of Bible where they preach Bible. Every hour on Maidan we had a pray Our Father, for example. So most of the people were, I think, were not very practicing Christians, but prayer was presented in Maidan as well. So the churches understand that they are not that their main task is not to stay to go closer to the state, but to go closer to the society. This was also for the traditional churches, but also for the Protestants, because Protestants were mostly unecumenical in their positions, that they were most coming from Baptist and Pentecostal background, and they were not very in they were like staying aside of the state life or what is going on in the country. For example, they didn't take part in the elections, they didn't go to army and so on. But after the Revolution of Dignity, a lot of Protestant community understands they are part of this society and they have to serve to this society. And especially afterwards, a lot were started to be more ecumenically open. They had started a lot of social projects. Also a big event for the religious life in Ukraine is granted of the Thomas of Autocephaly by Constantinople, by Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew I. So the idea of granting this Thomas was to heal the wounds of the Ukrainian Orthodoxy, because you can imagine for almost 30 years, a half of the Ukrainian Orthodox, counting millions of Christians, millions of Orthodox, were cut off of any relations outside of Ukraine. So, for example, when Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kyiv Patriarchate wanted to have seminaries, they could only have their own professors inside. When some of the priests went outside to serve a liturgy, even in Finland or in Romania, they will be then the Moscow will immediately will punish those who will co-celebrate with this priest. So they were cut off of all the religious life outside of Ukraine. So Patriarch Bartholomew says that he wanted to heal the wound of the Orthodoxy, but and he created a new we call it Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So this is the church which aimed to organize the life of all Orthodox people in Ukraine. But this didn't come true, at least now, because of different reasons. And I think Andriy will tell more about this reason, why is there still some hatredness between those two churches, and there is, and it isn't. This project was not successful to the end. But I think that it has. It will bring good fruits in the future. What happens? So two Ukrainian Orthodox churches formed one Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and still most of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate didn't join this new created church. So right now we have two big Orthodox churches in Ukraine, and they don't have communion between each other. And one church didn't recognize any sacraments of another one, any. but I think it was also okay. About the reason, Andriy will tell more. So the war started 2022, a big destruction. So this is the biggest war in Ukraine. 1,000 people have been killed already, a lot of injuries. We have millions of people left Ukraine. We count around 10 millions of people living that left Ukraine. Since that time, we have millions of people internally displaced in Ukraine, for example, when they lost their houses in eastern part or western part, central part of Ukraine, they just moved to the west. A lot of schools, hospitals, infrastructure is destroyed. Just to imagine that Ukraine is right now the biggest mined territory in the world, and if the war will finish right now, it will take more than 30 years in order to take off all the mines on the territories. So there are a lot of eco sites in Ukraine connecting with blowing of Damba in Kherson region and so on. So a lot of damaging, and the problem is that the war is continuing, and you never know where it stops. But from the beginning of the war, all the churches condemned this aggression. It's worth to tell, and right now the churches in Ukraine are very unique voice tell the world what is happening in Ukraine. What is important to tell about this was that it is quite a genocidal characteristic, because, for example, Putin regime denies the right of Ukrainians to have our own nation, our own government. They claim Ukrainians as Nazis, of this dehumanization of the people. Historian Timothy Snyder said a lot about it. You can also read a lot of his articles. Also, this war is anti-religious war, because on the whole occupied territory of Ukraine, of Luhansk and Donetsk region, and Zaporizhia region, there is no religious plurality, which we usually have in Ukraine. There is only one official Russian Orthodox Church. Even the parishes of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, they were renamed usually for the Russian. The whole eparchy have been taken, and the problem with the church that they keep of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, they kept their silence about what was happening over there. But the first victims in Donbass were Protestants, Ukrainian Protestants, back in 2014. Several months ago, we have been lucky that two of our priests, Ivan Levitsky and Bogdan Heleta, have been released from the prison. They were almost for 2 years over there, and it was a tremendous tragedy for them. But still, they right now they're witnessing what they were experiencing over there. So no religious freedom. So this war not only Ukraine as a nation and the political state as against society, but also against religions. And the pity that this war is not organized only by Putin, but together with Russian or with the leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church. And the church was the first one who declared this ideological claim about the Russian world, Ruski Mir, so-called Ruski Mir, and this ideology is presenting the territory of former Soviet Union as a holy territory, and we have to defend against Western decadence and so on. So it's quite a mixed theory about Moscow as a sad Rome, about Holy Russia, Rus or Russian world, and so on. So it's really interesting how they compare all this different stuff. For example, some could be a communist and also an Orthodox. Some could be telling about a greatness of the USSR, which killed a lot of bishops and priests, and at the same time be going to the church, and you see the icon of Stalin over there. So how it's possible to combine all this together? But in Russian imperialism, this is the core of this war. Everything is put together. So only a few priests from the Russian Orthodox Church said against the war. None of the bishop said against the war. So this is the Russian world. Yes, how big he could be. And just to finish with Ruski Mir, this is a message from the metropolia, one of the metropolia in Bryansk, is telling this, giving this icon to some of the soldiers who would come to kill Ukrainians. They said, you have to destroy Ukrainian nation. So, and blessed by bishop. So how big distortion of mind still exists in many people. So all the churches condemned the war, and it's was very clear. And Ukrainian churches still exist and still do a lot of work after the war. This is the meeting of the leaders of the churches in the frame of the All Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations. It was their visit to Rome, where they meet also with Pope during the week of prayer of Christian unity. You see almost all the leaders of the churches here, except one leader is missing. It's Metropolitan Onufri. He just sent his priest in the left corner. I will stop on three biggest churches. What are the challenges to every church, and what are the opportunities for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow or non-Moscow Patriarchate? Because officially they said they cut off relationships with Moscow in 2022 on May on their synod, but ecclesiologically they are still part of the Russian Orthodox Church because they're not autocephalic church, and now they couldn't proclaim themselves as to be autocephalic according to the Orthodox ecclesiology. So because this church was the one church through which the Russian Orthodox Church act a lot, through which, because they had links with Patriarch Kirill, who is one of the ideologists for this war, because through this church proclaimed ideology of the Ruski Mir, so a lot of big part of the Ukrainians were, let's say, not happy about the church. It were even to prohibit the church in Ukraine. Kirill Hovorun said that the church became a hostage of its own policy of its own leaders, of oligarchs, which also have a big influence on the bishops, and the own policy of canonicity. Because before they said that we are only canonical church, but right now when the Patriarch Bartholomew give a canonicity to other church, they, according to this position, stay behind canonicity. The problem is that they are not want to cleaning, go through the process of metanoia, as would say in the East, that all the mistakes they committed, they just mentioned about them. All the bishops that left Ukraine and cooperated with Russia, they don't speak about it. So lack of process of self-cleaning. They don't go to the dialogue. So, for example, they don't want to go to the dialogue with new created Orthodox Church, and they also cut off the relations with Constantinople. And Constantinople is the only church which could resolve the problem of canonicity or non-canonicity of the church. And they don't want to participate in any dialogues. But there are big opportunities for the church on the grassroots level, because many faithful and especially pastors want some changes. They don't want, they don't know how to do it, but they want changes. And there were a couple meetings between priests of different Orthodox denominations. I have 3 more minutes. Yeah, great. Okay, coming to the new created Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the challenges of this church is because it is young and the church doesn't have recognition from all the Orthodox churches. Only probably 5 churches recognize it as a church. And of course, because of the influence of Moscow, the lack of the trained personnel, it means that this church formed so it's like in its own ghetto in Ukraine. Yes, they didn't have possibility to send their students abroad or to receive any professors abroad. So they need time to grow up their church leaders among them. And temptation to be a state church, sometimes when they are proclaimed to be very Ukrainian, it's also a temptation to be close to state, not to the society, but to the state, because afterwards they could receive some benefits of it. But there are a lot of opportunities, of course, to OCU. It's all the Ukrainians wants to see in Ukraine only one church, and here this church could lead play the leading role. And they also are claiming to follow the open type of orthodoxy following the Constantinople. And they have a good trust within the Ukrainian society. Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the challenge is this is a minority church in Ukraine. Every time the Pope says something which is not so clear, so there are some media goes to us and asking why the Pope is telling this. So, and sometimes this blur position of Vatican is creating some challenges. But opportunities for the Greek Catholics are that we have a rich ecumenical experience, not only during the Ukrainian time, but also in the time of persecution, because a part of our church were in diaspora and participated in the Second Vatican Council, so they had a positive ecumenical experience. And many international possibilities and structures we had in Ukraine and abroad. So I said that what we had to do inside of the society, in the middle of the church, is to have a dialogue inside, which could be is the only way to do. And the last slide, what is the task of the churches today? First of all, stay those with those who suffer, because this is the main need for the church, because there are so many sufferings right now, not only on the front line. In every layer of society, we can find people, because it is 3 years of war, a lot of relatives, somebody lost his relatives, somebody is, some relatives on the front line, or some difficult situation, so tremendous sufferings. And churches trying to do their best, working together to inspire Ukrainian people and their right to live in dignity and to fight for truth. So resilient society, because resilience, this is our power, which give us strength to resist to what our enemy wants to do with us. A trauma healing ministry, a lot of churches starting to do this ministry. For example, a lot of therapy, a lot of helping people, centers, creating different networks of they trying to do their best in it. And international advocacy, I think it's also a very important task for all the churches. And in this task, our church are really uniting, about telling what is happening right now in Ukraine. So thank you very much, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Roman, for your interesting presentation, and I'm sure we will have some questions in the end of our meeting. And our next speaker is Dr. Andriy Fert. He holds a PhD from the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in Ukraine and is currently lecturer at the Kyiv School of Economics. Lately, he has studied the impact of the Russian war against Ukraine on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is under the Moscow Patriarchate, or perhaps it's not. He will clarify also about this a little bit to us. His research interests are the connections between religion, collective memory, and nationalism in Ukraine, as well as the microhistory of the Soviet anti-religious policy, and religious policy in Ukraine. So welcome, floor is yours. Now we'll just switch the screen.
Works. I was on the verge of saying good evening, but it's not evening, it's still day, so good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to take part in this interesting meeting. And I will begin with saying what I will not do in my presentation. So I will not clarify whether the church that I'll be talking about later in my presentation has any relations with Moscow Patriarchate or not, because I'm not an expert in ecclesiology, so I have no idea whether they're really part of the Moscow Patriarchate or not. Some of the parishioners and priests with whom I spoke believes that they are part of the Moscow Patriarchate, even despite these proclamations in 2022. Others says, no, we cut all the ties, we had nothing to do with them. So even among themselves, they don't know, or they're not consensus whether they are still members of the Russian Orthodox Church or no. And I have a rather provocative title for my presentation, and I've corrected my presentation because yesterday I had to deliver it to the head of students and I forgot to put quotations mark around the phrase Moscow Church, because like I said, I have no idea whether the church which I will be talking about in my presentation really has relations with Russia or not. But what is important to stress from the very beginning is that this church is portrayed in Ukrainian media by the Ukrainian religious activists, by many experts, by state officials as being Russian Orthodox Church, in fact, that has this disguise pretending to be Ukrainian Orthodox Church, while in fact it's Russian and it's instrument of Russian soft power, not even soft power. Whether it's really Russian church or not, because I have no idea about that. But the point is that the parishioners and priests with whom I spoke for my study, they live under this condition, they experience these conditions of being perceived by society at large as the members or representatives or Russian spies or whatever of Russia and Moscow, and their church being called Russian. So that's the point of this rather provocative title. And yes, these two guys you've already seen in the previous presentation, so I will not focus too much on explaining what is the difference between these two churches. But my topic, of which I won't be talking today, is the very sensitive topic of transfers. So there's the parishes of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate that transfer from this church to this another church, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, that is autocephalous, about what Father Roman told you about. So the topic is transfer, and the transfer goes from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, from UOC to OCU. So that's an important thing. There's no reversal process actually taking place in Ukraine. No, it doesn't work. Okay, so transfers. What transfer is very simple when it comes to the explanation that we have in the Ukrainian legislation. So basically, if you have a religious community, a parish of Orthodox Church, and you want to change the religious jurisdiction, you gather, you vote, and if the majority, so 50% and plus one vote, voted for this, you transfer from Moscow Patriarchate to this another church. It's very simple. It might appear so, but in fact, when it comes to actual practice, it is not at all simple, because for several reasons. So the first reason is that Orthodox Church in Ukraine doesn't have clear-cut membership. So there's no practically list of people that each parish has that, validated by the state, who says that this people has the right to vote to make this parish transfer. So no one knows that. Neither the priests, nor the state officials, none of them know actually. And if they say they know, they don't. They're just, trying to put you into some illusion. So they don't know. They don't have those lists. And only recently some priests really begin to compile the list. And of all those with whom I spoke, only 2 priests actually compiled the list of whom they consider are parishioners of their church and try to register these documents with the state officials. Others don't do anything about it, so they still don't know who the parishioners is. And the problem comes, and it's very acute, then when you don't know who the members of your religious organization actually are, that opens the ground for numerous violations. So, for example, imagine you have a village, and this village just have one church, and there are people who goes to this church like every week, every Sunday, but participate in liturgy, do some errands for the church, and etc. And there are other people, the majority of the villagers, who come to this church like for Easter, for Christmas, and end of story. But sometimes when the local officials at this village want to have the church of the right patriarchate, of the right church, they consider all the villagers living in this village, where we have only one religious organization, to be members of this religious organizations. So technically it means that those who go to the church only for Christmas and those who go to the church for every Sunday liturgy, in the eyes of state officials, considered to be equally true parishioners of this church who has the right to vote. I don't have idea whether it's good approach or bad approach, but it creates tensions and it creates numerous conflicts because priests and these active parishioners, by and large, stick to the Orthodox Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and when such transfer happens, that is for which voted mostly the people who go to church not that regularly. They're not unhappy. They're very unhappy, obviously. So they like saying that yes, it's not right, etc. So no clear-cut membership. No one knows who has the right to vote. So this is the first problem. The second problem is quite mundane. It's the problem of property, and it's like really important because there are parishes that has the temple building and the land plot on which this temple is built in their property, while there are other parishes they rent land plot from local authorities or rent the temples from local authorities. So it really might influence what way the possible transfer vote might go. Because if you have a beautiful old church that attracts visitors, you want to preserve it, but you rent it from the state. And if the state officials come and say, please consider transfer, you will put your thought to it probably because you want to retain the place of worship that you really like and is attracting visitors. So legal problem as well there, because as you can imagine, priests and parishioners mostly don't have legal education, and they mostly have no enough legal support from their dioceses. Even though Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate like to brag about how much legal support it gains from many world-known legal organizations, still they don't have enough legal support for their priests and parishioners on the ground. So it really influences what is going on the ground as well. So we should also keep that in mind. So these 3 problems really influences the transfers. And to the transfers themselves, so there were several historical periods in transfers in Ukraine from the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And as you see, I don't put their exact numbers because even though there are some reports and publications, stressing very definite numbers, how many parishes in those periods transferred from one church to another. But given these problems that I've listed to you earlier, actually no one really knows how many parishes actually transferred and what criteria should be used in order to calculate that this parish transferred and this parish didn't transfer. So there are only vague numbers, but you can see there are in the last 2 periods, since 2019, since the Orthodox Church of Ukraine gained the Tomos that Father Roman told you about, there were surge in transfers from one church to another. So more than 1,000 between 2019 and 2021, and more than 1,000 since 2022. But then again, no one knows what the correct numbers there is, and no one can really verify the data. And so anyone who says that there are no exact numbers of transfer, they're not very much speaking the truth, to say the least. So the question is, it's a very important one. So the church of which I talk, the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, or simply Ukrainian Orthodox Church, is being portrayed as a pro-Russia organization, as Russian church, or whatever. So the parishioners and priests daily, they live in this atmosphere of pressure, of societal hostility towards them. And why don't they transfer then? It's so easy. They can just vote and move to another church, and all this public pressure disappears. So why don't they do that? And in order to answer that, we need to set a background. So the first very important thing about the background that informs how these people think and how these people perceive the situation is to mention that church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, has very powerful internal propaganda. And it's very important to say that. So since early 1990s, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, as Father Roman correctly pointed out, perceived itself as the only true church in Ukraine that only has this canonicity. It represented all other churches as raskolniki, as schismatics, as heretics, as nationalists, as radicals. So this church propaganda was very powerful in influencing the way the parishioners and parish priests think of another religious organization. This is one example, and this presentation Heto can then forward to you all. So it has links. So it's one of the most important films in my understanding that was really influential, and it was really widely watched and accepted by the believers and priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's called Anatomia Raskola, or Anatomy of Schism. And basically this, by the way, it's in Russian, so if you don't speak Ukrainian, you still can watch it. And it was produced by Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra, so the main monastery of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in early 2000s. And it has this very important narratives that the church leaders tried to instill into their flock, try to instill into their parishioners, into their parish priests. Basically, it all boils down to the following. So all other Orthodox churches in Ukraine are political organizations. They're not real churches. They're just about politics, about, serving worldly interests, but not about God. Another very important thing from this film is that Ukrainian Orthodox Church is beyond politics. It's only about God. So that is why Ukrainian state and society don't like us. So because we true Christians and others are not. And the third very important part, and I really heard it very much in very many instances from my respondents, is that this another rival heretical schismatic churches, they don't really have followers. So no one go to those churches. Those temples stood empty. So this phrase, this phrase I heard so many times during my interviews. So it's like a buzz, that their churches are empty. They have no real followers. So that is why would we transfer to that church that no one wants to go to? They're just about politics. Probably that is why no one wants to go to that church. So all that traces back to many examples of internal church propaganda, of which this is one of the best examples, which you can watch and appreciate yourself. So the church propaganda informing the way that people inside of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church saw other churches around them, particularly the Church of Kyiv Patriarchate and then Orthodox Church of Ukraine, is very powerful. And it represented those other churches as political organization that has nothing to do with God and with no followers. So it's no surprise that many people inside of the church didn't like and still don't like other churches. So church propaganda is very important. Another thing that is very important when we talk about this recent transfers going on in Ukraine is this idea of decolonization. So when the full-fledged invasion started in 2022, the idea, this concept of that we should decolonize Ukraine, to do something with Russian influence, with Russian cultural influence on Ukraine, it became like very, very relevant in the Ukrainian society. And in the framework of this decolonization, which means getting away from Russian monuments and rethinking historical narratives, cultural narratives, whatever, there also appear another thing, which is very interesting, which is called spiritual decolonization. And there are many activist religious theologians and the state officials from the State Service for Ethnopolitics and Freedom of Conscience who promote this idea that we should conduct, in addition to this broader decolonization, we should conduct spiritual decolonization. And by spiritual decolonization, that means, as this one Ukrainian resource put it quite clearly, to get rid of the Russian church influence and to encourage the parishes of the Moscow Patriarchate to transfer to the Ukrainian church. So that is considered in Ukrainian society by many experts and by many scholars and religious activists to be part of this broader decolonization. So we need to do something about Russian influence. We should encourage the parishes to leave the Moscow church, in quotation marks because I don't know, and move to the right, true patriotic Ukrainian church, which is Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So that also is very important. And like I said, no one really knows how many parishes transferred actually, but there are two resources, and there's also available the links which you can check afterwards, two resources that try to monitor the transfer of parishes, but still they build their findings on open data. And open data, in this case, are unreliable, are very unreliable. So imagine that was a conflict in the village over the church, and one part of the story says that was not true parishioners who voted, and they just took away our religious buildings. And another side says, no, we transferred. Actually, that's a real transfer. And whom do we believe? That's the problem. So in order to verify the transfer, whether it really took place, you really need to go to the spot and to do several in-depth interviews with those people involved, because it's not enough to listen to just one part of the story. Unfortunately, when you do that based on open sources, it's impossible to properly verify such data. And this is a very sensitive matter that raises a lot of tensions and a lot of conflicts and conflicting narratives. So these transfer monitorings are very, very, very vague and unreliable. They can give you an idea what is going on, but only an idea. And if you want to have some real data that is reliable, it's unfortunately not available at the time. And probably with due scholarly investigation afterwards started, when the situation a little bit calmed down, and probably then and only then, it will be possible to do the proper research, in-depth research, to understand how many transfers actually happened. Because at the moment, this data are not reliable. And we're talking, moving closer. Yes, I have 15 minutes. No less. We're moving closer to the most interesting part, is that why don't they transfer? Why don't priests and parishioners of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate transfer to another church? And just to give you an example, this was the publication. So it's something that priest from the UOC posted himself. He wrote it himself. But still, all those reasons that he listed in this publication in early 2022 are very relevant, because I've heard them from many parishioners and from many priests with whom I spoke. So he listed 4 main reasons why he personally doesn't want to transfer to another church. And as you can see, all of them has nothing to do with religious validity of another church, with theological reasons, and purely psychological. So he doesn't like the idea that you should transfer. He wants the churches to unify. So it's going about unifications, not about transfer. For him, transfer is humiliation. So it's psychological reason. He doesn't like that fact that Orthodox Church of Ukraine, as he put it, with help of aggressive radicals, try to transfer UOC parishes to their church. Again, there's another psychological reason. It's not about theology. It's not that he's saying this church is not real. No, he doesn't say anything like that. Another reason is the negative rhetoric of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, this rival church, and the idea of collective responsibility. Anyway, you can read it. So the thing is, what he listed as reasons are psychological reasons. He has nothing to do, he has nothing against, judging from this publication, about the prospect of these two churches joining. eventually in one church jurisdiction. But he doesn't like the way it is being implemented at the moment. He doesn't like several things about that sounds purely psychological, that has nothing to do with theology and has nothing to do with some moral things. So this is really why I show you this example, is because what he listed here in this publication really, well, in my interviews with priests and parishioners, I hear that same reasoning. So mostly there were no any theological reasoning. There was no appeals to the canonicity. There were no appeals to the idea that we are really the only true church. So these things were practically never mentioned. There were only the psychological reasons that I come across when I did interviews with priests and parishioners of the UOC. So a little bit about my sources on which I based my observations. So it was basically 27 semi-structured interviews with priests and parishioners. So it was 7 parish priests. So it was very important for me to have the parish priest, so the leader of the parish, and 20 parishioners. How I selected them is because it's put some limitations on the observation that I have. So it's not representative study, obviously. I collected this because I'm not religious and I don't go to the church. But I have friends and other scholars who can put me in contact with some. So I asked them to help me to find priests and parishioners who are ready to record interview with me. And then I asked the priests and parishioners to recommend me another priest and parishioners with whom I can make an interview and try to perceive several simultaneous tracks. So it's called a snowball sampling approach. So that was one approach. And another one, sometimes I interviewed parishioners without their parish priest knowing about that. Sometimes I ask priests specifically, please give me 1, 2, 3 parishioners whom you think I should talk to about the sensitive issues that I want to talk with them. Sometimes, so like I said earlier, there's no clear-cut membership. So who are parishioners? That's the most obvious question. So sometimes when I ask priests, so it's the priest authority. He says that, yes, this, and this are parishioners of my parish, so you can talk with them. And sometimes the other parishioners with whom I talk, without priests knowing, they were like, shall we say, self-professed parishioners. So they themselves said that we are parishioners of this church or of that church. So I have no idea how to really verify that they're really parishioners of this church or of that church, but they still say that we are parishioners of this church, and I'm buying this point. So I have these 2 visions, okay? So whom the priest believes are parishioners and who themselves believe that they are parishioners. So I try to balance these views. And in addition to that, I have like 12 unrecorded conversations because many of them were not happy enough to be recorded, being like sit down and talk in depth for a quite lengthy time. And I collected these interviews between January and October 2024, so during the active warfare in Ukraine. So obviously, the active war and the public attitudes toward the church, they put certain limitations on what people are ready to talk about with you. So it was very important to somehow manage to get around these obstacles that are put by this idea of social desirability, which effectively means, so you can ask your parishioners or priests that, what do you think about the Orthodox Church of Ukraine? Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. What do you think about the Orthodox Church of Ukraine? And they would say to you in response, we don't like it. It's not real church, etc. But then you switch to another topic. And at some point later on in the conversation, you ask them, if there's no other church around, but you want to go to the Eucharist, would you go to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to take Eucharist or not? And they say, yes, because I need to go to take a Eucharist. So they don't think that's a real church, but at the other point of our conversation, they say they would go to that church and take a Eucharist. So you need to find a way how to talk with them. So that was very important. So basically about why don't they transfer, like I mentioned earlier, there's this problem with legal documents, with legal expertise and all this sort of stuff. And this was the phrase, I really like it because one of the priests like said it to me and like just get through my mind and accompanied me through all my research. So he said basically that the priests don't care of the documents and then they cry about persecution. So basically he said he's a priest who worked for diocese. So he kind of know what sort of state the documents of parishes are. And he said that mostly the parishes don't take care of their documents because they simply don't know how to do that. and the parish don't have enough resources to provide them with any support. So all the persecutions in his idea, so when the parishes are violently transferred from one church to another, is the result of this lack of proper documents, lack of proper legal knowledge, etc. But then again, there's also another problem quite visible, and one of priests has pointed out quite brilliantly in his interview. He said that many parishioners and many priests do not trust in institutions. They don't trust that state really would help them if they fill out all the forms that are required, register them, all this sort of stuff. They don't trust the state. They don't trust the institution. That is why they don't want to take care of legal documents. And so just go by and wait what would happen tomorrow. Something like that. And those things that I mentioned earlier about the church propaganda, mostly people with whom I spoke don't subscribe to the views of church propaganda. They don't say that Orthodox Church of Ukraine is not real church. They don't say anything like that. They don't think that it's a political institution. They don't think that it has no canonical rights. But still very few of them echo this church internal propaganda narratives, like their churches stood empty, they only about politics, they only about nationalism. But there are few. Mostly people do not have this obstacle in mind. And also psychological reasons earlier that I mentioned you, mostly when I ask priests and parishioners why don't they want to go to another church, they cite these psychological reasons. The OCU doesn't like them, it has this negative rhetoric, they don't welcome us, etc. So they don't want to go there simply because I had the psychological problems with them. With going to this another church. And many of them, and it's very important, like the vast majority of these people, they say that what is important for them is this parish community that they have. So like the second quote, so the parish community, it's important for them to be in this parish, to be part of this broader family. And to which church they belong, it doesn't matter. So they might disagree with, for example, politics of Metropolitan Onufri, and says that he is like I won't say that word. Okay, so that he's doing something wrong, but still they love the church, they love their priests, they love their fellow parishioners, and they want to stay in that community. And they don't care what other people think about their belonging. So I will probably stop at this point, and I will think we can discuss more in the discussions. Thank you for listening.